Oh, darling, what's wrong? Feeling the crushing weight of existence after yet another week of desperately trying to run a race you're slowly becoming convinced will never end? Yeah, that's exactly it. Wow, you should be like a therapist or something. Me? Absolutely not. I hate listening to people talk about their problems. I find it boring. No, I was just thinking about what to do with this week's opening skit. I feel like I've, run through all my voices. I feel like I got nothing left. Well, you haven't done me yet, have you? Ah, that's actually a really good point, Dr. Armitage, one of the characters I play in the upcoming animated series, The Chronicles of Clinchport. Ooh, yikes. Talk about a forced plug. Don't you work in marketing? Certainly you can do better than that. Give me a break. It's been a long week. Well, you'd better show up with better writing than that for the animated series. I will not be portrayed poorly. So, in other words, I'll just portray you as the character that I created, right? Don't flatter yourself, darling. You didn't create me. I just chose you to tell my tale. Huh. Wow, that's actually pretty deep. That's what she said. You know what? That's it. Get out. I've got a podcast to record. Damn, mine's always in the gutter. Sorry about that, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the Saved as Draft podcast, the only show where I, Bradley Ramsey, talk to you about the craft of writing, what I'm working on, and why you should care. Episode 8, and can you believe it's already been another week? Yikes. Well, I've got a great show planned for you here, and I've got some exciting shoutouts from new authors as well, so let's get into it. Alright, starting off with our introduction, and Flash Fiction February, as of today, is actually over. Today's final prompt asks you to pick your favorite piece from the last month and write a sequel or a prequel to it. Now, I'm running a day behind myself, so my last piece for the month will probably come out over the weekend. I actually haven't decided which one I'm going to do the sequel prequel to yet, but it's fine. It's fine. I'll get to it. I'm always behind. That's a running theme here. And good news, for March and April, I'll be announcing a new writing challenge in partnership with Hazel Allen. We'll be announcing the challenge on a brand new publication in the next few days, so it'll have information on how to register, how it's going to work, and it won't officially start until about mid-March, so you'll have time to kind of figure out if you want to join or not. And since you're being so kind and listening to my podcast, I will give you a hint about what the challenge entails. It's about helping people finish that project that you've been working on. You know what I'm talking about. That novel, that novella, that series that you wanted to write, but you just haven't gotten back to it yet. This challenge should hopefully help you feel like you can finally finish it. So stay tuned. March will also bring back the Soulful Poetry Collective's monthly newsletter. And if you haven't subscribed to this publication run by myself and Mary Ellen Brady and you write poetry, well, you should. We're going to be doing a monthly newsletter with poetry challenges that offer you the chance to be featured in the next month's newsletter if you win, so it's pretty cool. And for all those who enjoyed Flash Fiction February, don't worry about that either. We'll still be doing prompts. They're just going to happen weekly moving forward. I'm actually going to call it Flash Fiction Friday because I love alliteration. And I might even try making some more complex prompts or settings using something called a story engine deck. And if you haven't heard of this, it's really cool. It's a tool that has 6 different types of cards spread across stories and characters and world building and other elements. And you basically kind of put the cards together at random to create a complex prompt or a setting or both. And it's really cool. So I may experiment with kind of putting something like that together and then taking a photo of it and having that be a weekly prompt. But we'll see, because it's one of those things where I don't want people to look at it and be like, what the hell am I looking at? Kind of thing. So stay tuned, but we still will do weekly Flash Fiction Fridays. All right. And as we get into this week's shout outs, I just wanted to say that we're doing the same thing as last week, where I started a thread on my subscriber chat and I had people drop links, and then I used a random number generator to pick out 5 shoutouts, and I think this is a really cool way to do it. So I'm going to keep doing it if everybody's cool with that. If you have a better idea, suggest it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. So for this week's shoutouts, we had about 15 people submit. I picked 5 at random, and I've already read all of them, of course, so let's talk about them. Number 1 is Travel as a Path to Emotional Well-Being by Sarudha. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. This piece is the first article/personal essay that I believe we've had on the podcast, and I'm really excited to talk about it. The premise of the piece is that people see things like creative outlets as healthy, but then when they talk about travel, suddenly it's this whole like, oh, you're just escaping reality, you're not actually facing your problems kind of thing, which I think is fair. I've heard that before. So the article argues that travel, when done with intention, is actually about reconnecting with life, and it allows you to be immersed and reflective when you do it for the right reasons. The piece goes on to discuss how travel can teach us things like adaptability and resilience, which I absolutely agree with. In fact, let's do a quick side note here. I didn't start traveling myself very frequently until recently. When I started my current job in marketing about 5 years ago, 6 years technically, but about 5 years ago, let's say, I started traveling a bit for that job. And they're based on the West Coast in Pasadena, so obviously I've been back and forth a bunch of times in those over the years. But they also send me to different conferences, so I've been to other parts around the U.S. I haven't actually been out of the U.S. at all, except for like one family trip forever ago when I was a kid. So point is, I haven't traveled much until recently, and it's been in the U.S. But during that time, I had to face my anxieties around traveling alone and, figuring out, well, how am I going to get to my connecting flight? What does an Uber pickup look like at an airport? Like all these things that I've never done before. And that was pretty scary. But coming out on the other side of it, I really felt like I learned a lot and I grew as a person. And so that's a perfect example of how travel can really be good for you. I even ran into travel delays like everyone does when they travel. There was one time where I was stuck at LAX for almost 48 hours without sleep. And let me tell you, that was horrible. Horrible. I really hope it never happens again, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Well, I'd probably wish it on a few people, but, it's still bad. It's real bad. We can agree on that. Back to the article, though. If you love travel, or if you're someone who likes, trying to step outside their comfort zone, the article is a really great read. It's honest, refreshing, and it provides a unique perspective on travel as a whole. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. Number 2 is The Frost Keepers by Kristen Rosenbach. Now, I've sung Kristen's praises on Substack and on the podcast before, but I'm always excited for the chance to discuss her work. Her stories feature a dog character named Shadow, who I've said multiple times is one of my favorite literary figures, and I will say that until the day I die. And Kristen's stories have this way of kind of connecting her characters with nature and illustrating humanity's place in the world. This particular piece, The Frost Keepers, was for one of our Flash Fiction February prompts, and it's about her and Shadow truffle hunting as always. But in this story, it actually takes place during winter in the Pacific Northwest. And the first thing you'll notice about this piece, and any of her pieces really, is the quality of the writing. There's a strong sense of atmosphere from the get-go, and it's so good, actually, that when I was reading it, I started feeling physically cold. And I was like, oh, geez, I need a jacket. Even though it wasn't that cold, I was just getting so immersed in the story. It was really cool. It's good. Over the course of this particular story, you'll also learn about the role that fungi play in the broader ecosystem and the magic that happens right beneath our noses in everyday nature. And you'll find that as a common theme in her stories as well. So you get to go in for, a bit of an adventure, some great characters, and you learn something. It's really cool. And if you haven't checked out her work, this is a great place to start. Number 3 this week is Fatal Precision by Mary Ellen Brady. So everyone who reads Mary Ellen's work, and if you don't, you should know that a lot of her work is very cozy, it's very magical, it's whimsical, and it's usually set in or around a fictional location called Starlight Cove. Not to brag or anything, but I did get a cameo in one of her recent stories. For her birthday, she did this kind of really cool promotion where if you had donated or if you're a paid subscriber, that she would write a story and give you a cameo. So I had a character named Bradley show up in a story called Bleeding Love, and let me tell you, it was really cool. Especially because she kind of, because it was a cameo for me, she gave it a bit of a horror angle, and I loved it. It was so good. And now I'm immortalized forever in Starlight Cove, so we can cross that one off the old bucket list. Back on topic, though. Fatal Precision is Mary Ellen trying her hand at a technological thriller, and it's actually part of a mini-series where she demonstrates this remarkable understanding of AI in its current form and where it can go. I've seen her balance all kinds of crazy stuff in her stories. She'll have magic sometimes. She's mentioned quantum mechanics before, and now she's doing AI like it's nothing. This is truly a multifaceted writer, and this piece is yet more proof of that. In this piece, she uses Flash Fiction February prompt to show how a rogue AI is collecting information on humans and using it to optimize us and turn us into data to the point where it can basically control when we live and die. It's really terrifying stuff, but given the trajectory of AI and how fast it's progressing, I mean, as someone who works in tech, I would say it's entirely plausible, which is really scary. Now, I'm sure Mary Ellen's going to go back to her cozy magical fiction, and that's totally fine. But I think we should all take a moment to appreciate a writer like this who can step out of their comfort zone and write something that feels like they've been doing it for years. It's really impressive stuff, and I applaud her for it. Number 4 is Prologue, The Battle of Isvitar Castle by Ember. I hope I pronounced that right. This one is a new writer for me. Again, chosen at random in that thread there, and I was blown away. I love how unique and fun the writing style was here. There's a little note at the beginning about how this particular prologue isn't canon to the rest of their story, but it features a lot of things they like and they're really proud of it, so they posted it. Makes sense to me. Unlike many prologues you'll read, especially in fantasy, this one bucks the trend of being, very world-buildy, very exposition-y. It kind of jumps right into the action and doesn't waste any time getting into it. It's fantasy, as I mentioned, but I would almost classify this piece as a new subgenre that I am lovingly calling punk fantasy. And let me explain. The writing has this sort of edgy, irreverent tone to it that defies that usual sort of pomp and circumstance you would expect from a fantasy story. And to be clear, I love it. I really do. The style, it keeps the story moving, but it's also constantly injecting personality into the narration that lets you learn more about the main character. You get all the details you need to know, but it's delivered in a way that feels really fresh and unique, especially for the fantasy genre. A great example is a fight scene near the end, where the main character is up against impossible odds. And instead of trying to play out the battle scene by scene like other writers would, which honestly can have mixed results, Ember puts us squarely in the head of the fighter in the moment, explaining what's going through their head, what they're thinking, and how they're reacting to the battle. It's such a cool and intimate way to describe a climactic scene like this, and it works beautifully. I was completely immersed in the story from beginning to end. And I can see why they liked it so much that they wanted to post it regardless whether or not it's canon. So do me a favor, give it a read, subscribe to Ember, because I imagine that there's going to be a lot more really cool stuff coming from this author. Number 5, and the last of our randomly selected shoutouts for the week, is My First College Party by Rocky's Thoughts. So I've been friends with Rocky since my earliest days on Substack, going back to an inside joke about how I'm the personification of the quote-unquote void that people always joke that they're shouting into. That's a funny story. I won't go into it here because this episode's going to run long already, but check it out. Early episode of the podcast, I talked about it. It's very funny, but suffice to say, Rocky and I have been friends for a while. So I have to also mention that Rocky made a little jingle for me that I've been meaning to use in the podcast, but my audio editing skills are really bad, and I'm using Audacity to record this, which for some reason doesn't let me upload MP3s. It says I need some sort of add-on. I don't know. I'm working on a Mac right now, but I also have a Windows PC. I was thinking about trying it on there. If anybody uses Audacity and you can point me in the right direction, it's a really fun little jingle, and I would love to add another layer to the podcast here in the form of music, and it's, I'm really grateful that Rocky made it. But let's talk about Rocky's story. So My First College Party is, like most of Rocky's stories, a story that comes from personal experience, and as a result, it feels very relatable. It feels very genuine. Her style of writing feels like sitting down with a friend to talk about memories or sort of reminisce about the past, and I really like that. There's a certain nostalgia to Rocky's stories that I really like too, and this one's no different. This story is the tale of how she was invited to a party in college, and despite it not really being her scene, she went anyway. Now, as someone who was a super awkward nerd in high school, and in college to be fair, I think we can all take a second to appreciate how much courage this took. And as the story goes on, you'll find out pretty much what you would expect from a college party. People were offering her alcohol, drugs, all kinds of stuff. And she turned them down because it wasn't her thing. And despite feeling out of sorts, this story is a reminder that we should, as people, always look for opportunities to step out of our comfort zone. Because in some cases, it'll go exactly how you would expect. But also in other cases, you'll discover experiences that you never would have had otherwise. So I think it's important to remember that balance. I myself went to parties like these in college, and I had a good time, but there's always a part of me that, like Rocky, just wanted to go home and be left alone. And honestly, these days, that's entirely my vibe. So thank you to everyone who submitted. And once again, shout out to all 5 writers here. Check them out. You can find all of their stories in the episode show notes, direct links. And I highly recommend that you give them all a subscription as well, because they do great work, and they will continue to do great work, I can tell you that. All right, next up is our top 3 Substack stories from this past week. This is the section where I look at the top 3 performing stories on my Substack and talk about a little bit of behind the scenes for each one. So let's get into it. Our top story this week at 501 views was Crush Depth. Crush Depth was for a Flash Fiction February prompt where the card that I had that day said that the Mariana Trench was not the deepest part of the ocean. And with this one, I took my usual sort of experimental approach to it, and I'm really happy with the reception overall, to be honest. I was a little worried because what I did was I made the entire story, essentially an audio transcript, like you were reading, just lines of dialogue, essentially. But people liked it, and it's got a crazy twist at the end. And if you haven't checked it out yet, give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Drop a little comment at the end. I would love to hear what you think. Next up is The Sunken Citadel at 436 views. This story is another Devine tale, and it's set before the events of my very first Devine story, The Tomb Where Marigolds Grow. It focuses on the disappearance of Queen Feyrin, who we heard about briefly in that other story, and it reveals some cool backstory and lore about the Eluthian Titans who created Devine and how they may have a connection to the technologically advanced Varak Horde that you may have heard about in other Devine stories, who have tried to invade Devine once and will most likely do so again, hint, hint. Number 3 this week was my poem called Unapologetically You at 414 views. I really like this poem. It was inspired by one of my trips to Electric Forest, which is a musical festival in Michigan. A lot of EDM, dubstep, folk music, that kind of stuff. And it's one of those festivals where it's several days, so you go and camp. It's really, really fun, especially if you go with a good crowd. One thing that I noticed going there was how when you're at the festival, everybody's just super welcoming, super friendly. Honestly, I equivalated to being on Substack, but in real life, it's really cool. People there also come from every possible walk of life. I mean, every lifestyle, every configuration of human being you can imagine, you'll find them there. And so it's this melting pot of just pretty much infinite diversity. And it's really, really cool. It feels special, especially in today's day and age. And what I loved about it is that during the event, people were just unapologetically themselves. They didn't care what anybody else thought. They dressed how they wanted or lack thereof. They danced how they wanted, and they didn't bother anybody else. They were just being themselves. And I realized that that's honestly how it should be. Not just at like a festival, but in life as well. So that's what inspired this poem. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Let me know what you think. It's one of my favorites. All right, next up is our weekly writing tips section. And as you probably saw from this episode's title, this week we're doing world building. And world building is one of those topics that could really be its own podcast. So this isn't going to be a comprehensive look at the topic, but I'm hoping that it'll give you a few things to think about and kind of get the gears turning for anybody who's looking to try their hand at world building for something, bigger than just a short story, for example. So I myself am world building all the time, as you can probably tell with my connected universes and, some of the larger projects that I have. But specifically, I've been doing it lately for 2 big writing projects that I'm working on as part of a larger team or with several other people. And I know that in a situation like that, it's really important to get the details right so that everybody on the project is kind of on the same page as far as how the world works, both at a high level and a granular level. So with all that being said, I'll be using a fellow Substack writer's articles on world building here. Number 1, because I don't have any to reference myself that I've written. And number 2, I think they're fantastic and extremely comprehensive. Honestly, even if I did my own world building article, I don't think it'd be as good as these. So let's pause real quick. Huge shout out to Zechariah Blackwell for letting me use your articles on world building as references for today's podcast episode. I super appreciate you. And I'll be placing links to both of Zechariah's articles in the show notes if you want to dive deep into world building. And I promise you, these are an excellent place to start. So with that out of the way, what's world building? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's shaping a fictional world down to the very minute details, like the people's diets, their jobs, the weather that they experience, and everything else. It can be pretty daunting when you try to think about it all at once. It's a little overwhelming. So a lot of people ask, where should I start? Looking at Zechariah's article, he recommends starting with geography and environment. And I tend to agree with that because those things will dovetail into pretty much everything else. So in the article, he talks about how environments define the way that people live and how they navigate their world. And you should start by thinking about things like terrain, climate, and available resources. This lets you kind of get the foundation in place so that you can then zoom out and start thinking about, okay, so now we know like kind of the world they live in. What is their culture like? Do they have any religious beliefs? What are the social norms? What's not normal? What's considered weird? What's against the law, right? Specifically, Zechariah's article comments on things like language, dialect, religion, mythology, traditions, rituals, and social hierarchies. And that's just an example of how insanely comprehensive this article gets. It's very, very useful. But think about it. I mean, that's a lot of things, but those are all elements of a real society. Our world may be more technologically advanced than, say, a fantasy kingdom, but many of the elements are the same. You need to think about all these things when you're putting together a world, and that includes stuff like politics, power structures, governments, and anything else that might or might not play a role in your story. Because here's the thing, even if some of these elements don't directly affect the plot of your story, what happens if somebody just mentions it? What if it comes up in conversation during a scene? What are you going to do if this topic comes up and you have no idea how it functions in your world? You're going to hit a creative dead end. So Zechariah's article also, beyond all these things, talks about magic, which is another key element of certain worlds. Not every world, but definitely some. And when it comes to magic, I wanted to talk about what people call hard magic systems and soft magic systems, because those are two different things. So a hard magic system is something that's strict. It's defined by rules, principles. It's pretty close to a science almost, right? So in the story, people will discuss it. They will adhere to it. It'll be very unyielding in terms of how it works. And as part of a system like this, you'll also have a pretty general understanding of how weak or powerful a magic user could potentially be. Maybe, even if it's not said in the story, it's something you as the writer will know if you're working with a hard magic system. On the flip side, a soft magic system is less concerned with details like that. It operates based on the plot and the needs of the story. It kind of takes a step back and acts more mysterious, and maybe not even the writer is really concerned with mapping it out entirely. And to be fair, both are entirely valid approaches to magic systems. I would consider either option when you're building a world where magic is something that comes up or is a part of everyday life. I would also recommend Zechariah's article on balancing plot, characters, and world building. See, when you're actually writing your story, it's important that you don't let the pacing get bogged down trying to explain how the world works. That's something a lot of writers fall into. My recommendation is to let it come up organically. And remember that these things are something that should not be blocks of exposition that you drop on the reader. Look for ways to make it feel organic, and what I mean by that is they see something, like, for example, if you're trying to get something across about a corporation in your world, let them see a billboard, let them hear a commercial, let them listen to the radio, something that feels natural, right? Instead of you just being like, hang on a second, I know we're in the middle of the scene, but I need to tell you about this corporation. Like that doesn't feel right, So look for ways to make it organic. And a final note that I would like to throw in there is that if you're looking for a good place to start, I'll let you know what I do. I start a Google Doc, and I usually label it as that world's guide, like a world guide. And I break it up into much of the same categories I mentioned here and others. And then I go through that doc from top to bottom, and I fill the whole thing out like it's a worksheet. I think about it in a way that's like, okay, if I left this project right now and another writer came in and they had to kind of get equipped and, immersed in the world to write a story there, what are they going to need to know? Think about it like that, right? Except you're giving yourself this information at this point. And this will help you stay organized. And if you break it up into pieces, you're probably not going to feel so overwhelmed because it can be overwhelming. So give it a shot. Let me know what you think. And make sure you check out Zechariah Blackwell's guides on world building in the show notes and give them a read before you start your next major project. I guarantee you'll find a lot of value in them. All right, and that brings us to the Substack Soapbox Rant. And this is a long one today, so settle in, get some coffee, refill your tea, whatever you like. Today's rant, we're tackling a subject that's come up a few times in the last week, and in this podcast, actually. That's right, we're going to talk about AI. AI, or artificial intelligence, has been a staple of fiction since I was a kid. And before that, even, honestly. It's something that was usually reserved for science fiction and part of Hollywood movies like The Matrix and the Terminator series, for example. And you know what's funny about those movies? They were fiction, yes, but they were also kind of warnings. I mean, obviously warnings. Giant billboards that basically said, hey, don't do this when technology gets here, okay? And guess what? Instead of listening, we elected an idiot for president and somehow got roped into a buy one, get one deal that includes a douchebag oligarch that hitched a ride to the White House, like one of those downloads on the internet that sneaks in a copy of McAfee antivirus software. And here's the thing, I don't want your spammy software. I've seen documentaries about that dude, and I don't want what he's selling. I don't want anything he'd give away for free either. So don't try to sneak it onto my hard drive. And honestly, between climate change and AI, we basically have a nice little roulette of existential threats to keep us stressed out all the time, threatening not only our existence as writers and artists, but as a species too. Modern society is, it's depressing. Anyway, back to AI. So let me tell you a story here. A few years ago, when ChatGPT first came out, I was in Pasadena at the home office for my job. I'm working in a little cubicle. I'm moisturized. I'm flourishing. I'm in my lane. I'm all those things, right? Then I had a colleague in the office come to me and say, hey, Bradley, I've been meaning to ask you, as a writer, what are your thoughts on AI? So I stop what I'm doing, calmly set down my headphones. I turn to them and I say, how much time do you have? Here's how I explained it. And here's how I explain it from a professional standpoint. After this, I'll explain how I feel about AI as a writer and artist. But let's start with a professional, kind of measured approach, right? Professionally, I see AI as nothing more than a fancy version of Google. When I need to know something about a specific topic, I will go and ask ChatGPT about it. And crucially, I'll say, hey, give me some sources. See, I have to write a lot of articles for work. And let's say I'm doing something really, kind of ambiguous, like nearshoring and reshoring trends in global supply chains. All right, so I'll go ask ChatGPT to give me some talking points about the article and some topics associated with it. And again, with sources, so I can make my own judgments about what to include and what to leave out. I'm not just going to take what it gives me and, oh yeah, it's perfect, I'll write that. And it works well for that. I'll give it that. I can get some basic info. I can get a few directions to go in as far as research is concerned. And it saves me a bunch of different back-to-back Google searches where I look at the results and go, no, that's not what I meant. So for research purposes, I'll hand it to it. AI is pretty handy. But when it comes time to write the article, I close that tab. And I do what any writer does. I write. I don't ask it for help. I don't say, hey, give me a first draft and I'll work it from there. No. Hell, I don't even let it give me an outline. I throw that out too. Writing is for me and for humans. You can be Google on steroids, ChatGPT. That's fine. So professionally, that's where I'm at. But what about personally, as a writer, as an artist? Do I think AI is an existential threat? Yes. And no. I think there's enough real art in the world and real artists in the world to stop it from ever replacing all of us. But I do think that AI has tried, and I think as it gets more complex, it will continue to try. So it's a battle. It's an ongoing battle. Plain and simple. Because AI is not just going to go away. I mean, sometimes I wish it would just, bow out, but I know in my heart of hearts that's not going to happen. So, accepting that, as much as I don't want to, that means I have to live with it, or at least exist alongside it. And let me preface this next part by saying that these are just my opinions. Okay? If you don't agree, that doesn't mean I hate you or that we can't be friends or that you're a bad writer. As long as you're not letting AI write your stories and articles for you, we're cool. I'm just talking about how I handle things. So that being said, personally, I don't think AI has any place in the creative process beyond very, very, very high-level brainstorming. If I need help coming up with a name or something, I'll ask it to give me some examples of similar names, and then I'll look at that and kind of come up with something different, from my own mind, but I'm not going to use anything it gives me. And on top of that, I'm never going to ask it to help me plot my story. I'm more of a pantser anyway, but beyond that, I'm not going to ask it to give me an outline. I'm not going to discuss my characters with it. I'm sure as hell not going to ask what it thinks about my ideas, because here's the thing, it's an algorithm. It's a piece of software. It doesn't have a brain or thoughts or feelings, at least not yet. So it doesn't get to have a say in how my creativity works. Full stop. Some people use AI for more in-depth brainstorming, and you know what? That's fine. Honestly, as long as it's not writing for you, like I said, it's cool. I don't judge those writers. I just think that AI, like any petulant infant technology, it needs boundaries. Or it's going to grow up and get addicted to the AI equivalent of drugs and alcohol, and that's going to be a whole different problem. Let's just wrap this up with my thoughts on AI images. No. I'm sorry, I don't like the way they look. They have this sheen to them that makes me immediately want to gag. And through involuntary exposure to AI images, I figured out how to spot them, and they just trigger the uncanny valley part of my brain in a very unfun way that I don't enjoy. But I know some people use them, and that's fine. What I would say is, if you're using it for articles and stuff, I mean, again, it's not my thing, but that's fine. But don't use it for something big like a book cover, okay? I understand that hiring an artist costs money, but there are free tools and resources. If you check out my article, 10 tips that I've learned in the last 10 years as a writer, I linked several resources for images that you could use. And on top of that, I'm a big proponent of Canva, which is totally free. They do have a pro option, but you can do tons of stuff with the free thing, and you don't need to be a graphic designer. Please, just, if you're doing something like that, let it be made by a human, okay? Please, that's all I ask. And here's the thing, I'm in a place where I can afford a Canva Pro subscription. I'm lucky enough to have that. I bought a year of Unsplash Premium as well because I love their images and I want to source stuff from human beings. I've used real photographs. I use 3D renders that, again, were made by people, and I feel good about that. And sometimes I take those things and I remix them in Canva to make something new, and that's fine too, because it's all handcrafted, okay? Just like my stories. AI doesn't have hands. Not in the traditional sense. It can't mold something from nothing. It can't get inspired. It can't stare off into space before gasping loudly and going, holy shit, that's a good idea. It can't do that. You want to know why? Because it's not human. It hasn't suffered like we have. It hasn't lived through emotional highs and lows and been through life. It hasn't fallen in love, had its heart broken, or stared at a painting in a museum and thought to itself, hey, I need to rethink my place in the world. It hasn't done those things. And no amount of feeding it stories about those things is going to make it human. Creativity isn't a formula that you can nail down. It's not a math equation that you can solve for. Even the most robust quantum computers are not going to be able to just create something from nothing the way we humans can. Creativity is chaos. It's lived experiences and inspiration woven together into a tapestry that looks different from writer to writer. It's intangible. It's unknowable. It's something uniquely human. And as much as I hate gatekeeping in all its forms, it's just not something AI can do or should ever be able to do. Now I hear you asking, Bradley, what if the AI becomes sentient? What if it can think for itself? What happens then? Well, to that I say, have you seen Terminator or The Matrix? Because if you have, then you should very well know what happens if we go down that path. Will that stop us? I don't know. And honestly, given the people in charge, I'm not super hopeful. In the meantime, please, use AI as a tool to help you do your job better or streamline your brainstorming process, but do not, under any circumstances, let it take over for your creativity. At that point, and I'm being honest here, folks, you'd be better off not writing anything at all. Okay, that was a long rant and that got really intense. I'm sorry, but it's true, and I believe every word. I get really passionate about the whole AI thing. Whew, let's shake off the nerves. Talk about what's coming next week. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, keep an eye out for the writing challenge that Hazel Allen and I are hosting in March/April. We'll have an announcement soon and some fun little activities leading up to the launch of the challenge itself in mid-March. We'll also be doing our weekly prompts this week instead of daily for Flash Fiction Fridays. Keep an eye out for that. I've got the first 2 locked in, but please feel free to send more suggestions and I'll keep them in a little file. Now that Flash Fiction February is over, I'm also going to start trying to get back to posting some weekly writing articles about writing itself. Next up, I'm thinking about finally tackling imposter syndrome. A lot of people have asked about it. It's a hard thing to talk about because it's so nebulous and it's different for everybody, but I'm really going to try, as I always do. And I've got a few other topics after that lined up, thanks to my subscribers who answered my thread about writing articles from earlier this week. So thank you for that. And as I mentioned and kind of hinted to, I've got some new writing projects starting in March, so I might be a little bit less active, but don't panic. We'll still get our weekly podcast. We'll still get, hopefully, mostly daily publishing from me. But in lieu of that, I'll be out there. I'll be reading, engaging, boosting your work. That will never stop, no matter how busy I get. And that is a Bradley promise. That's it for another week. It's funny. I always get to the end of these episodes, and I just feel this profound sense of appreciation and gratitude for all of you. The people listening right now, the ones who don't like podcasts and skip this every week, every single one of you. I've always wanted to be part of a real writing community, to feel like I belong, to feel like my work and my support makes a difference, And I feel that here. I feel it really strongly, and I feel it every single day because of every single one of you. You really are some of the best people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. I want you to know that. And honestly, I consider it both an honor and a privilege to read your work and talk about your work. So, before I wrap up here, I just want to raise my glass to you, my fellow writers, artists, designers, and everyone else who exercises some sort of creativity. This episode, this podcast, everything I do is dedicated to you. So let's have another great week of writing and growing as artists and people. This is Bradley Ramsey, signing off.